Thank you very much, sir, for your fond memories with Dr. L.C. Gupta. Now, this year's guest of honor of the program is Shri Amarjeet Singh ji. Shri Amarjeet Singh ji has been working with SEBI for last 25 years and has extensive experience in regulation and supervision of securities markets. He is presently working as Executive Director in charge of the Corporate Finance Department, dealing with primary market reforms, issuance and listing of securities, corporate governance, corporate restructuring, delisting, etc. He also heads the Department of Economic Policy and Analysis at SEBI. Mr. Singh has been involved in various international regulatory initiatives. He has acted as Sherpa for SEBI's representation on the board of International Organization of Securities Commissions for 7 years. He chaired the Assessment Committee of OSCO during 2016 to 2018 and set an assessment program for conducting thematic assessment at the global level. He represents SEBI as a part-time member on the board of National Financial Reporting Authority, NAFRA, and on the board of governors of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. During 2017-19, he was on the board of National Institute of Securities Market, an institute founded by SEBI. With these words, I, on behalf of the society, request or invite Shri Amarjeet Singh ji, guest of honor of today's program, for his remarks.
Thank you for that kind introduction, undeserving, I guess. After what you heard from Shri Chaurasia, something straight from the heart, so I am tempted to give up my prepared speech and talk about my experiences with Dr. L.C. Gupta, but I think that would not be fair. Maybe we can do that offline, I guess. So, Dr. D.B. Gupta, Chairman SCMRD, Dr. Kalpana Gupta, Shri Ashish Chauhan, Shri Indra Chaurasia, Dr. P.C. Jain, good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon to all the people who've taken time to come for this event today. I am really thankful to the society and especially, Dr. Kalpana Gupta for inviting me to this event. It's indeed a very special occasion. I think let me just, very briefly tell you how I met, before I come to my prepared text, how and when I met Dr. L.C. Gupta for the first time. So I still distinctly remember it was year 99, I think the winter of 99. And I needed some guidance. I was a very junior officer, I was in SEBI barely for 5-6 years. And I needed some issues were there where I needed some guidance. And, so my regional head was very kind to introduce me to Dr. Gupta, and I went and met him in his office. And when I met him, I was clearly stumped by the rare insights which I thought he had, and, very knowledgeable and something very different. I was fortunate actually to keep up my association with him for a number of years until I moved to Bombay, much later. I have very fond memories of my interaction with Dr. L.C. Gupta. Of course, as I said, we used to engage a lot on the professional issues, and I learned a lot, I can say that. So when Dr. Kalpana Gupta reached out to me a couple of months ago about this event, I immediately said yes, of course. And it was, a call, like a call from the distant past. So, and it brought back the memories of my association with Dr. L.C. Gupta. So what I would like to do as a part of my formal address this afternoon, I would obviously like to go back in time and recount the stellar contribution made by Dr. L.C. Gupta towards the development of our securities market. He was a towering personality, as you know, has been already acknowledged by previous speakers also, a true visionary. In fact, I gave a title, Dr. L.C. Gupta, a capital market reformer ahead of his times. So that is the title of my speech. So, a true visionary, not just in the sense of who made a huge contribution to the first generation structural securities market reforms, but he also had this rare foresight, of the regulatory architecture, which has to be built after you've laid the foundation. So first immediate task was to lay the foundation after the reform started. But what was to come after that, he had a very good understanding of that as well, and he articulated that actually. So my address is in two parts. First, I'll talk about Dr. Gupta's rich legacy broadly in three parts. First, his guidance in steering the first generation securities market reforms. Second, his pioneering work for development of the derivatives market in India, which was also referred to, and other significant contribution. In the second part of my address, I would very briefly talk about how the outcome of evolution of securities market reforms has brought at what stage our market is today. So let me, first guiding the first generation securities market reform. So let me rewind and go back in time to the early 1990s. The SEBI Act was passed in 1992, giving statutory and autonomous status to SEBI. And the task for SEBI was very clear. It was very clearly cut out. It was threefold: develop the securities market, regulate the securities market, and protect the interest of investors in securities market. And development at that point of time, it was a much bigger and a more immediate kind of challenge. You have to have a market before you regulate, right? So market had to be developed. So as a part of the broader economic liberalization agenda of the government, the securities markets was opened up and freed from the erstwhile control regime of Controller of Capital Issues, CCI. And the market needed fundamental structural reforms at the institutional level, at the product level, and also at the operational level. And of course, as I said, after CCI was gone, a whole new regulatory architecture or a new regulatory construct had to be established, had to be put in place. So building these initial critical pillars, this was an uncharted territory for a small team at SEBI in its early years. And while SEBI was developing its own capacity, we definitely there was an urgent need for advice and guidance from market experts, from researchers, and policymakers to make quick progress on various fronts. So it was during those early critical years, SEBI had the good fortune to benefit from the wisdom of Dr. L.C. Gupta. He was appointed as a part-time member on the board of SEBI with effect from February 1994, and I think he was a part-time member up to 1997, if I remember correctly. And also, not only that, after that, he was associated with SEBI in other capacities also as chairman of Committee on Derivatives and other committees as well. And during that period, mid-90s, I would say, or early to mid-90s, that decade actually entirely, there were, huge number of reforms were brought about in the market, and he was involved in many of those reforms in terms of guiding the policy work. So just to give you very quickly a flavor of what was done during, those years in primary market, where the funds are raised, and the secondary market where trading happens. So the primary securities market moved from a merit-based regime to a disclosure-based regime. Disclosure and transparency became the new buzzwords, and the requirement to make offer documents, IPO offer documents public, that was introduced for the first time in mid 90s. The mind passing my mobile phone.